Now ready to start our next session, morning session, the second one. I would like to welcome you to this session. And our first speaker is Dr. Efstathios Kessareas. He's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Erfurt in Germany. And the topic that he's going to present is the phenomenon of Orthodox rigorism, fundamentalism, its deep historic roots and its modern transformation. Dr. Kessareas, the floor is yours for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before I start, I would like also to thank all speakers for accepting the invitation to participate in this conference. And of course, a special thanks goes to Vasilis Makridis and Pantelis Kalaitsidis, who organized this conference. Now, I have to say that I would like to ask you to show great indulgence today because my subject is really enormous and I have only 30 minutes. And the difficulty increases because fundamentalism, it's not only a multifaceted historical phenomenon, but also a very contested concept, not only in ordinary life, but also in the microcosm of academia. Of course, there is a long-standing debate over terminology, which for reasons of the time I cannot review here. But since in the title of my presentation I use two terms, let me only say this. Fundamentalism is strongly associated with modernity because it denotes a spirit of opposition, a spirit of strong opposition to theological modernism and generally to the liberal trends of modernity. Because as it is well known, as a phenomenon, it has its historical origins in American Protestantism in the late 19th century, and then in the 20th century became a significant phenomenon. Today, I will also use as a term the term rigorism to refer to cases of religious zealotry or aggressiveness that also occur in a pre-modern context. In any case, it is not my intention today to defend as a fundamentalist a specific term, but rather to highlight some specific features of this mentality, as well as its practical consequences, but with a special focus on contemporary context, on its modern transformations. The second thing I would like to mention is that the subject of Orthodox fundamentalism is not a terra incognita. In recent years, we have many publications, conferences, collective volumes, and papers that highlight significant aspects of this phenomenon. On the following slides, you can see a selection of such works. I have highlighted only because for reasons of time some keywords, and I will read only this because they express significant aspects of the phenomenon, the areas of its investigation. For instance, anti-pluralism, recent invasion, soul through faith, clue to solution, Russia, United States, the phenomenon of elderism, conversion, fundamentalism as a opposition to eschatological orientation of Christianity, the conflict between the different terms, the slogan orthodoxy or death, a multifaceted phenomenon, the term of orthodoxism, intersection of modernity, postmodernity tradition, again, Russia, United States, during the period of COVID, the pandemic, the issue of politics, the ideology of the Russian world, and so on. And I have personally published a few articles on this subject with a special focus on Greek Orthodoxy during the recent periods of the coronavirus pandemic and the Greek financial crisis. Why I'm saying all this? Because it is very difficult today to present something totally new. Okay, so I will interact and draw from the work of my colleagues, from my own previous works. I will add some new details and present my subject from a sociological interpretative framework, which means that my aim today is to present Orthodox fundamentalism as a specific mode of thought and action. I will also search the reasons behind the emergence of such attitudes, and I will investigate these reasons both in history and within Orthodoxy. And in the end, I will offer a summary, and I will try to open the perspective. So let me begin with this question. What is Orthodox fundamentalism? Now, instead of giving you a definition, I will try to reconstruct the specific features of this phenomenon. And in this way, I will begin with a contemporary example. Then I will build on this example, going forth and back in history, and investigate different countries. In this way, I believe that I will avoid the danger, the risk of perceiving this phenomenon as a kind of having an evolutionary conceptualization of this phenomenon, namely that fundamentalism follows a linear line of development within history, which is not the case. So recently in Greece, there have been demonstrations against the compulsory introduction of new biometrical identity cards, which were perceived by people with strong religious convictions as a kind of economic slavery that will pave the way to the Antichrist. You see here, these people are holding holy icons, crosses. One woman has drawn the sign of the cross on her forehead. A monk preaches in front of a war memorial. So in this context of anti-systemic effervescence, if I may use this term, the following incident took place. In a small city close to Athens, Evia, a married woman insulted a priest with the characterization that he's a traitor, a sellout, and a New World Order proponent in Greek Neotaxitis. And he even slapped the priest because, according to her view, he didn't take a clear stand against the new identity cards. And the woman invoked as argument what she has heard from an elder of Mountain Athos via the internet. So my argument here is that here we can find all the basic constitutive elements of this attitude together with new elements of its modern transformation. For instance, discursive violence that can even reach the level of physical violence. And there is always a legitimation basis. For instance, that there is a strong belief that the priest is not, instead of serving his role as protector of the holy things, he's actually a traitor to the faith and to the nation, as I will shortly say below, because he works like an organ of the dark forces of the New World Order. So here we have all the classical motives, like the issue of the Antichrist, the prophecies, the Manichaean mentality, combined with new elements like the conspirational thinking about the New World Order. Now, it is also worth noting that according to that priest, that woman is an old calderist. This is a group famous for its rigorism. Of course, within the history of Orthodox Christianity, one can find many other groups. And here I can draw from the work of Vasilis Makridis, who have his work offered such examples of such rigorist groups in the history of Orthodox Christianity. For instance, we may think of the iconoclastic controversy, or even earlier, the murder of the Neoplatonic philosopher Hypatia in Alexandria, or in Russia, the movement of old believers in the 17th century. And yesterday we have heard the historical context by Father Gregory concerning the Niconian reforms at that period. And in my own work, I have also tried to demonstrate that even not only the religious field is not homogeneous, but not only the subfield of fundamentalism is not homogeneous. There is either an internal struggle within that group, for instance, who represents the authentic, the genuine faith. Those of the old Calderar accuse the rigorists of the new Calderar as pseudo-conservatives. And of course, the role of the internet nowadays plays a great role in the dissemination of these schemes of thought. Now, let me return to the characterization. Now, in the Fox-Sox, there is the so-called law of the three, according to which the things are presented in threes, and the last one has the most weight. If we apply this law here, we can say that we have a shift of the emphasis from religion through economy to politics, in the sense that as I have said before, the priest is not considered only an enemy of a traitor to the religion, but also to politics. That a new world order state of affairs will be established, which of course will be in opposite to religion, either because it will implement an atheist state of affairs or an ecumenical religion. And the important point here is that all these actors use this religious rhetoric, these religious classic motives in order to implement contemporary aims, for instance, their opposition to specific financial or political measures, or the promotion of nationalism, as I will shortly refer to. So they use religion as a kind of ideology. And the second thing is that their mode of thought is characterized by what I refer to as holism organicism. So they do not believe that these different spheres of life are differentiated. And on this, I would like to expand more. Now, in modern Western societies, as is well known, are comprised of different spheres of life: science, economy, media, politics, which function within an immanent framework, to use the well-known term, Taylor's well-known term. Of course, this does not mean that religion does not play any role. However, it is not a combining condition for the working of modern society. And according to the functional differentiation thesis, the religion, the church, can play a role, but as a subsystem in this society, under two presuppositions. First, that it respects the values of modernity and this kind of differentiation, and a related presupposition that it will not try to impose its own principle, its own values on the whole society, but it will restrict itself to serving the spiritual and existential needs of its members. As you can imagine, the fundamentalists reject this kind of factional differentiation because they place the Orthodox Church at the center of society, and what is more, they consider it as ark of the nation and as the most fundamental pillar of the state. So for them, when they accept the different spheres, they accept it under the presupposition that all the different spheres are in line with the most, for them, important religious values, namely that all the different spheres are imbued with the same essence of orthodoxy, of Orthodox spirit. Of course, this is far away from a differentiation. And for these actors, the Orthodox Church should always submit to its sacred spirit and not change its spirit according to the ephemeral surrounding environment, which is ephemeral. Now, let me expand more on this religious mode of thought. These actors feel that there is an acute crisis that happens in the surrounding environment, but at the same time, they feel a holy duty, a holy responsibility to warn the faithful about the signs of the times, and what is more, to persuade them to follow, to develop a moral attitude that will function as a kind of protective shield against the various prophesied evils. But in order to persuade the faithful, and this is my argument, they have first to develop an explanatory framework why these crises are happening, and second, to offer a solution to these conditions of crisis. As regards the first condition, we have here the so-called problem of theodicy, and for them the answer is very simple. It's a word, in a simple word, it's because of the apostasy that the faithful have abandoned the laws of God in their the attempt to become, their illusion to become modern secular Europeans. And as a solution, they offer as a solution a kind of sincere repentance, but this must be, in their own view, a collective repentance, which means a return to the genuine faith. But this is not a passive return. It always takes the character of a fighting stance against the various enemies, both of the nation and the faith. So these actors are not just men of prayer. They are agents of action. And you see here an image from a monk from the Sphygmenu monastery ready to throw a Molotov against the police officer who tried at that time to seize the occupation at the Sphygmenu monastery. Of course, I do not, to avoid any kind of misunderstandings, I don't want to say that all fundamentalists reach this level of violence. But what they all have in common is this warrior spirit, is this fighting stance. And we can, I will give you an example of this fighting spirit. An ultra-conservative newspaper in Greece called Orthodox Press says that it will continue to be vigilant and hold high the fighting banner. Only those unable to see the signs of the apocalyptic times are not worried and will continue to surrender. Those who sense the critical signs of the pan-heresy of ecumenism and love orthodoxy should wake up and take the shield of faith and the sword of the Spirit. Let the words of the Apostle Paul be a rousing trumpet. The hour has come for you to wake up for your slumber. So you see that these actors make a selective use of the sacred sources of the gospel. They choose framing vocabulary that has a military vocabulary. For instance, shield, sword, fighting banner, trumpet. And in order to instill in the faithful a sense of imminent threat, they always attempt to construct an apocalyptic atmosphere. And let me give you a relevant example here. From the period of the Greek financial crisis, I read, today the burdensome yoke is not Ottoman, but European. Occupation is imposed on us by Brussels. No good can come from the unrepentant descendants of the papists, colonialists, crusaders, and inquisitors. Greece is now accepting the conspiracies and attacks of the European monsters, which came out of their thickets with their mouths breathing fire and with their sharp teeth ready to seize and destroy the Greeks. The gates of the European hell have opened. Apart from the apocalypticism, which is rather obvious, the most important thing here is that they use this classical, they try to use framing vocabulary that recalls traumatic historical experiences. For instance, the Ottoman yoke, the Nazi occupation, the great schism between the churches, but in order, and I would like to emphasize this, in order to accomplish contemporary aims, which here is their opposition to the austerity measures from the European Union. And of course, it's not only in Greece. We can find the same motives, the same conspirational thinking in other Orthodox majority countries, for instance, in Russia. And here I draw from the work of Mitrofanova, who have made research concerning fundamentalist groups in Russia. So you see here again that these actors deny that there is a pandemic. For them, it's just a sabotage, a cloak with the intention a new world government to be imposed. And this new world government is a state of affairs that will pave the way to the Antichrist. And in such a framing, the vaccination becomes a method control, or even a weapon against the faithful. You see again the military vocabulary, concentration camp, killing, control, and so etc. A combination with classic motives like the Antichrist. So these actors are proponents of strong, what is characterized in bibliography of strong religion. You see that they hold banners, no, orthodoxy or death. Another banner says, the New World Order wants us enslaved, the Orthodox Church wants us free. They hold Greek flags, the Greek fundamentalists, the Russian flags, and so on. So they are very close connected with nationalism, and sometimes this nationalism it becomes even more an open flirt with neo-Nazism, as I'm going to show you in this example. In few years earlier, in another demonstration, the abbot of that Brotherhood of Eskimel Monastery told to the audience the following: Greece belongs to Greece. Greece is the whole world. So you see here, again, this sense of superiority. They have taken from us and became humans. When we were building Parthenons, they were still cannibals. The Agorites monks took money from the Jews and enslaved the Holy Mountain to the Jews. They will enslave us to the Jews for all of our life. So you see here again, we have this Manichaean distinction between we and they. And the first term is equated with humanism, with civilization, Parthenons, whereas the second term is deprived of any kind of humanity. They are just cannibals. And this is connected with the Jews, with the stereotype that Jews with their money will enslave not only the whole world, but even a holy place like the Holy Mountain. And he continues, my dear brothers, if the Jews complain that Hitler killed them, and the shouts from the crowd lies, they should be careful this time, because a Greek Hitler may appear. We do not need their money. Christian Orthodoxy remains. And you see, in such a framing, there is, they expect a leader to manifest a Greek Hitler that will clear this, according to them, parasites, and that they will protect not only the faith, but also the nation, because for them, there's an organic unity between nation and faith. The hour has come, he continues, for the Greek nation to be glorified again. And as I have said before, they do not just make a selective use of the gospel, but they also misuse the gospel, because here the Jesus saying the hour has come for the Son of God to be glorified.
Hitler is mentioned here positively. The Greek Hitler.
Yes, positively. So they misuse these sayings from the gospel, and you see from the crowd shouts the slogan of the neo-Nazist Golden Dawn Party, which was criminalized, blood, honor, and Golden Dawn. But Orthodox fundamentalism does not only flourish in Orthodox majority countries. We can also find similar attitudes, similar modes of thinking also in the West. For instance, in the case of Orthodox converts from well-educated ones from Protestant evangelical background. Of course, here, as far as I know, we will not find the kind of aggressiveness, the kind of Molotovs, but we have here the same mentality as I'm going to show you in a while, against the culture of the West and against the Western morality. We have the same fighting spirit. Let me give you some examples. 5 minutes, okay. So here is an Orthodox convert, ex-Baptist philosopher, professor of philosophy, who, according to him, there is an ongoing persecution that is coming, an open persecution, and the Christians will have to live a life in the catacombs. And here again, we have this Manichaean distinction between we and they. Who are they? According to him, they are all those who support the abortion, the Black Lives Matter and the same-sex marriage movement, those who are against the anti-racist policies. And for him, all these forces are signs, but not the traditional apocalyptic sense, are the signs of fragmentation of society, but against this is something manufactured by the power structure of society. This is not considered a conspiracy, but an objective aim of objective groups who have an aim, that is to establish a borderless world, to promote consumption and individualism, be it Marxist or global capitalism, and to uproot the particular and the specific. And in such, if such is a diagnosis, the following prognosis comes, that all these actors have to counteract, and this counteraction is a kind of moral catechesis. For instance, that homosexuality, premarital and extramarital sex are great sins, are the great enemy. And you see the frame vocabulary, the repetition that we should focus on the basics, focus on an authentic Orthodox life, sticks with the basics, be true to the patristic traditions, and not submit ourselves to the zeitgeist, which is considered as a condition created by psychopaths. So for them, the solution is twofold. One, a return to the fidelity of the faith, and second, that they should inculcate orthodoxy so as to construct a local church, as opposed to those Orthodox, for them they are not real Orthodox, for those Orthodox actors who are trying to promote a public orthodoxy, which for them is a kind of consumerist, superficial Orthodox. So you see the internal struggle that happens within within Orthodoxy. I will skip this passage taken from the work of Gallagher. It's the same, again, they consider the same as the resistance fighters. I will come to Greece. Again, this feeling is more intense in Greece because they feel as refugees, as they say, in our fatherland. This spirit of the world, the spirit of atheism has conquered everything with the assistance of the hierarchs, with the assistance of the official church, who have abandoned their spiritual children and have helped in order a total occupation to be happen. And again, you see that this famous vocabulary that Christ came not to bring peace, but as a sword, sorry. And the famous Pericles saying that opportunities do not wait. So these actors must act right now. There's no time for living later on the action. And again, for them, you see the transformation that the Antichrist here is globalization, is the new age of globalization. Why? Because it threatens this close bond between Hellenism and Orthodoxy. So at the core of this mentality, there is what I call an anti-something mentality. There are various enemies. Today is globalization. In previous periods were communism, during the cold period or even before. And I have deliberately left open a bracket because new enemies come always. But all of these enemies threaten the Orthodox identity, which considered for them as diachronic and as unchangeable. And they perceive themselves as guardian of Orthodoxy. They even accept the accusation that they are Taliban of Orthodoxy because they perceive themselves as instruments of God, as opposed to their opponents who are portrayed as traitors to faith and nation and as instruments of the evil. And of course, you can find this logic even more in the case of the phenomenon of elderism. We heard yesterday a few things about this from Georgios Landis. Spiritual elderism, why? The elders are become idolized as bearers of spiritual superiority, and all this kind of spiritual of prioritization with the metaphysical and the principle of obedience, which is being internalized in the habitus of the faithful, leads to a situation of blind trust to the elders, a situation described similar to what Weber has described as magical anthropolatry. And in such a context, for these actors, any kind of change is considered as a temptation from evil that will bring eternal damnation, but what is more, as a bomb that will destroy the foundations of the Orthodox nation. But we're not talking about actors that aim to overturn the church. We're talking about forces of virtuoso ultracism or radicalism, as Sieber has said, who aim to return the church what they consider to be a pure form of religious faith. Now, very quickly, because I do not have time, the other section of my presentation is that we can apply the so-called fundamental categories of thought in order to analyze in more detail, in more depth, the logic, the mode of thought of these actors. Very quickly, because I do not have time. For these actors, they conceptualize the person, they special emphasis on charismatic figures. They even conflate the notions of the ethno-martyr and the neo-martyr. For them, the agents of history are this beard of charisma, the fighters of the faith that will protect the Orthodox nation. Whereas, as concerns the notion of the space, they perceive it as a closed sectary territory where homogeneous community worships the unchanging situations of faith and nation. So they place emphasis on ethnicity, locality, or nationhood. The nation of borders are very important for them. And as regards the time, the past is the prevailing time sense. But again, this past is used in order to achieve contemporary aims. Again, I would like to highlight that this mode of thought produces specific practical consequences, this kind of fighting stance. So it does not offer fertile ground for the development of a constructive engagement with modernity. The modernity is being demonized. You can see the words that I have highlighted, an attitude, a sense of return, to repent and return to the laws of God. I will skip all these kind of things. But what is important to highlight is that despite their objective to defend and reestablish the boundary between the sacred and the secular, these actors use the means and the strategies of modernity, as also Professor Moskos has said before, in order to accomplish contemporary aims. And this has secularizing consequences, even if these are unintended on their own behalf. And give me 1 minute, please. Just to mention that if we would like to explain why such attitudes arise, I think that we should pay attention very much to the historical context. In my view, it is always in conditions of crisis that these attitudes find fertile ground for development. Why? Because people, because of the condition of crisis, try to find a meaning and stability, and these actors present themselves as the ones who have the key solutions to the problems. And of course, we have to pose to ourselves the difficult questions whether there are some internal elements within Orthodoxy that can offer fertile ground for the development of these attitudes. I'm not meaning here in the sense of determinism. The fact that Orthodoxy, as the term reveals, is being perceived as the only true faith can give, in certain context, space for demonization for alternative beliefs. The same with a tradition when this is essentially perceived. Any change perceived as a diabolical heresy. I will not read the passages. The case of the idealization of the Church Father, we have heard it yesterday, so I will skip it. And of course, is the fact that Orthodoxy plays particular emphasis on mystical knowledge in order for the faithful to achieve the condition of theosis. And this is also another factor that we should take into consideration, as well as the anti-Western sentiments, which Vasilis Makridis have in detail explained yesterday. So to sum up, these actors are frustrated with modern life. They develop a fighting spirit against modernity. They use religion as ideology in order to achieve contemporary aims. And by recycling old religious themes and traumatic memories for the basis of new articulations, they fear up feelings of anxiety and fear, and they create a condition of enthusiasm, of effervescence, in contrast to the routine of ordinary life. And I will conclude with this. Thank you for your patience, that we should open the research perspective, and in order to understand very well fundamentalism, we should place it within the external struggle that takes place within Orthodoxy among the various currents, but also to search correspondences with the broader historical context, for instance, the opposition between globalization and nationalism. But more for this, you can read my 2 forthcoming articles, the second written together with Professor Makridis. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kessareas, for your informative and provocative presentation. Let's move now to the second speaker, who is Dr. Maria Hämmerli. Okay. She is lecturer in religious studies at the University of Fribourg, Switzerland. Her topic is Eastern Christianity in the West, Endogenous and Exogenous challenges of an encounter. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to greet everyone and express my gratitude to the organizers for having invited me, especially to Professor Vasilis Makridis. I missed the opportunity of visiting Volos with the IOTA, so now I'm happy to make it up this time on this opportunity. So thank you. As you can see, my title has slightly changed. Because when I prepared my presentation, I realized that I was going to speak to theologians, to Orthodox, who know very well the realities I'm going to speak about, and it would have been a bit redundant. So, because usually I'm used to speak to social scientists who usually do not know the Orthodox situation. So I changed a little bit the perspective, and I think I did well because most of the things I intended to say have already been said. So, the title is Eastern Christianity in the West, a gift approach to the challenges of an encounter. The settlement of Orthodox people and churches in Western Europe and North America as a result of successive waves of migrations beginning early 20th century occasioned unprecedented challenges for this ethnically and linguistically diverse religious group, which suddenly finds itself in the position of minority religion. On the one hand, there arose internal questions of proper ecclesiastical organization, liturgical practice, identity reconstruction, and religious transmission. On the other hand, migration brought Orthodox people and churches in unmediated interaction with modern and postmodern cultural, political, and religious developments in the West, with which they were not particularly acquainted. So, in the following, I will just outline an example of an internal challenge and an example of an external challenge that this encounter with the West has brought about in Orthodoxy. So the first one is the overlapping of jurisdictions. And I'm not going to describe it in detail because you all know what we speak about. So when the Orthodox describe this challenge that they face, they describe it as an infringement of the ecclesiastical principle that attributes one bishop to a specific geographical territory, and it appears as an inconsistency with their own theology. They also are critical about their situation because it impinges inter-Orthodox unity and prevents common agency. And they justify it mostly at a hierarchical level by pastoral necessity of a given situation, and it is practiced as temporary economia. So further criticism that can be addressed to this is that it supports and reinforces ethnic and national criteria of organizing and running the church. It allows for political and ecclesiastical actors back in the homeland to engage into power relations with the diasporas, and it fosters competition among the various jurisdictions. So this is just simply put the content of the challenge. Now the exogenous challenge, so the one that comes from the outside, it consists in cultural change. So there is an impetus for cultural change through disruption of tradition. So Orthodox describe this challenge as discontinuity with the teachings of the church and a disruption of a divinely given order that constitutes the norm on which social life is built. And further criticism has been addressed as a non-alignment with contemporary scientific and philosophical developments brought about by Western modernity, or as measuring contemporary social change by the yardstick of ancient rigid religious principles, or as a form of anachronism. So we have seen examples of this, plenty of them in the presentations yesterday. And now the question I would like to answer is, why are these challenges? So it's not enough just to enunciate them, to describe them, to show their instantiation, but also to explain why. So in order to explain, let me see where I am in my slides. So I think the answer has to be based on Orthodox self-understanding. There is abundant empirical evidence about Orthodox people and institutions describing and practicing Orthodoxy as a form of gift. This is underpinned by an abundant theological vocabulary centered on the gifts. The world, human life, salvation, the church are explained as gifts of God to humanity, who is called to return the gift to God. The omnipresence of the theologically embedded notion of the gift in Orthodox self-representations calls, for me as a social scientist, for an appropriate theoretical framework to capture this complex web of meanings provided by the empirical data. So social scientific explorations of the gift introduced by Marcel Mauss define it as a paradoxical social phenomenon combining freedom and spontaneity, interest and disinterest, and unfolding according to a triple obligation: to give, to receive, and to give back. Though Mauss's seminal theory of the gift has been applied in many fields of human activity, such as economics, politics, art, and education, it has rarely intersected with religion. Camille Tarot is among the few scholars who have addressed religion within the gift paradigm, and I will base my analysis on Tarot's definition of religion as a tri-axial system of the gift. So this system of the gift consists of a vertical axis, which describes the circulation of a gift between man and God, a horizontal one, along which one can find gift exchanges between co-religionists and peers, and the longitudinal axis, which contains gift relations between generations, between the living and the dead. And what is given is part of social networks, which are part of networks of meanings and values. Now, how do I apply this to orthodoxy? The application of this theoretical model to Orthodox discourses, practices, and theological ideal types is helpful in understanding the Orthodox system of the gift. On the vertical axis, man responds to God's gift of grace by giving back worship and various forms of obedience, such as fasting, confession, monastic vows. On the horizontal axis, gift exchange practices can be identified both at the individual level, as illustrated by service to one's neighbor, and at the institutional level, in the form of the Church's philanthropic activity or in inter-Orthodox relations. The longitudinal axis deploys the gift in the relationship Orthodox people have to their deceased ones, to saints, to tradition, as well as the transmission of the faith to future generations through catechism, underlying the co-presence of generations and the idea of continuity between past, present, and future. Tarot argues that the specificity of each religious system lies in the way it articulates the three axes and on the emphasis it places on one or another of the axes. In the case of Orthodoxy, it all points to the centrality of the vertical axis, that is the relationship to God through right worship and in view of divine human union. The theological ideal type that underlies the importance of the vertical axis is related to Orthodox anthropology, which defines man's place in the creation and his relation to it, that is the horizontal axis, and man's place in history and beyond time, that is the longitudinal axis. This leads to the second specificity of the Orthodox system of the gift, namely the facts that the axes are neither fully separated nor self-sufficient, but interlocked and interdependent. The gift activated on any of the axes calls for its symbolic reproduction on another axis or on all three of them, involving thus the whole gift system. So maybe I would just give an example here, but what I mean by that, it's an example I came across on the field. People ritually give food, objects of everyday life that are intended to some deceased members of the family, but they give them, so this is the longitudinal axis, but they are given de facto to people, to living people. So this is the horizontal axis. And the person who receives this is in Romanian culture, it's a very common practice. And the person who receives, so the actual recipient, of the gift says, may God receive it. So it points to the vertical axis of the gift. And we can find this kind of interconnectedness in many of the practices and also the beliefs. So the Orthodox self-understanding is about a system of the gift ruled by the omnipresent normative reference to the divine that reconnects various elements of the cosmos, the present and the past and the future. It is thus against this self-understanding of orthodoxy as a particular system of the gift that I will address now the challenges I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. So, based on this, why are multiple jurisdictions a problem or a challenge? So why is the overlapping of episcopal jurisdictions presented as a serious threat to the Orthodox unity? To understand this, we have to go back to the Orthodox gift system and recall the fact that the Orthodox consider their ecclesiology as divinely inspired, so the vertical gift, and a continuation of apostolic practice, the longitudinal gift. In the diaspora, the ethnic criterion, which partakes to the horizontal immanent dimension of human existence, has taken over the divinely inspired and apostolically established territorial principle. This has determined the overall organization of the Orthodox presence in the West, where several bishops exercise authority over ethnically defined communities within the boundaries of the same territory. For example, in Paris, there are at least 7 Orthodox bishops pastoring their own ethnic flock, instead of one single episcopal representative, as it would have been coherent with Orthodox ecclesiology. This parallel hierarchy is viewed as a negation of Orthodox unity because it seems to imply that the respective ethnic Orthodox communities behave as if they were not in communion with each other and did not recognize each other's episcopate. Unity being one of the core attributes of the Church, because it is supposed to mirror the unity of the Holy Trinity, it is therefore critical that it is de facto embodied in the life of the Church. Besides failing to provide unity as commanded by a sense of coherence with the vertical and longitudinal gift, the overlapping of jurisdictions in diaspora contains another ecclesiological challenge, that of the mother churches overstepping their right of jurisdiction by extending it beyond their canonical geographically ascribed territory. They record their role of managers of the gift on a defined geographical area by shifting the focus from the territorial criterion to the ethnic criterion, which requires the Church to be faithful, to be the faithful pastor of a particular community, wherever this community may move geographically. This further legitimates national churches to exercise jurisdiction outside their original canonical provinces. This appears to influence inter-Orthodox relationships in the West in a pernicious way, because political and institutional entanglements back home are reverberated in the diaspora. This means that parishes of Russian, Romanian, Serbian, or Greek origin in the West get to be influenced by domestic realities, in addition to the challenges prompted by the host country's socio-political and religious specificities. The perpetuation of the gift, which tries to keep balance between reproduction and recomposition of the gift, is under the twofold influence of the home and in the host contexts. The relations among the Orthodox churches in the diaspora, so that is among ethnic dioceses, but also among ethnic parishes, are therefore embedded in global ecclesiastical and political stakes. Moreover, the multiple jurisdiction leadership in the West raises the question of which church is more entitled to have authority over these territories, but I will not go into that because it's another paper. So now what is the problem with with cultural change, with innovation, and with overcoming tradition? Orthodoxy negotiates with modernity as a cultural phenomenon from a very particular standing point, tradition. Okay, but what do we mean by tradition? As with all definitions in Orthodoxy, this one is also rather vague, even when it is formulated by theologians. So it's phrased like the life of the Holy Spirit in the Church, or the continuous life in the truth, the inner spiritual mystery of the Church. And these are, however, there are, however, two components of the concept. On the one hand, there is tradition with a capital T, designated also as holy tradition, which points to a series of dogmatic formulations by ecumenical councils and church fathers. It is a non-negotiable, solid component, if I used Zygmunt Bauman's metaphors with solid and liquid, a gift of God to humanity in which God reveals himself, and as such, it cannot be subject to amendments or to other human additions. On the other hand, there is tradition with a small t, which can be used in the plural, and points to the social embodiment and enactment of tradition with a capital T. So as such, tradition is multifaceted, adaptable, and context sensitive, and can cover a variety of expressions, espousing the subjectivities of those who incarnate it, without, however, being reduced to nor confused with these subjectivities. To continue using Bauman's metaphor, traditions are more liquid elements of the Orthodox understanding of tradition. As social and cultural forms in which tradition with a capital T is molded, traditions are a depository of practices, rituals, and teachings that continue to inspire Orthodox believers universally and inform culture in Orthodox countries. This strong attachment to traditions and the sacred status granted to tradition with a capital T represents a distinctive Orthodox trademark, between brackets, which the Orthodox churches and people use as a source of authenticity. Because their faith is ancient, has been preserved untouched by the time and practiced in its original forms, it has the legitimacy of claiming to be the true faith. Orthodox theologians and clergy argue that this strong bond with the past is by no means a source of religious backwardness, but a source of creative and ingenious enactment of dogmatic affirmations, a spiritual exercise which is possible at all historical periods and in all human societies. However, the Orthodox claim of continuity with the message delivered by Jesus Christ and with the apostolic practice of the faith, believed to be confirmed through the mystical experience of the saints and actualized constantly in the life of the Church, has attracted also criticism against the Orthodox institutions as stagnant and petrified. Non-Orthodox observers, contemporary social, scientific, cultural, historical critics acknowledge incomprehension and perplexity at the Orthodox reflex to turn to the past in order to find solutions and inspiration for contemporary issues. But their critique is epistemologically rooted in a linear perspective on history and the concomitant presupposition that humanity is engaged in endless progress made possible by breaking with, or at least critically revising what has preceded. Modernity has an indisputable proclivity to discontinuity and change, which is at odds with the Orthodox insistence on continuity and embeddedness of the present in the past. Despite this claim to perfect continuity, the Orthodox world has actually innovated on many occasions in their history. They happily accepted the nationalist movement in the 19th century, which is a secular ideology. Iconography was for long influenced by the Renaissance and later by realism. The Slavonic tradition of church music found inspiration in Western polyphony. Some local churches implemented the new calendar in 1924. Some places in Greece used organs to accompany liturgical chanting in religious services. In early 20th century, many local Orthodox churches also joined the ecumenical movement, and so on. However, innovation here is not equated necessarily with the contemporary meaning of the word as a relentless search of novelty and originality through differentiation with past practices and meanings. Novelties or adaptations have always been presented rather as revival or renewal or deepening of tradition. So if I were to translate this in the language of the gift theory, Orthodoxy recodes novelty into a form of reaffirming or reinforcing tradition, that is the longitudinal gift, a way of perpetuating the gift by absorbing and transforming what appears as threatening. The above-mentioned innovations have not aimed at the solid tradition with a capital T, but operated rather at the level of liquid traditions. The authority of tradition remains a reality that I don't know, somebody called like perennial modern. However, we should not remain with the impression of some monolithic Orthodox attachment to tradition. There are also Orthodox theologians and thinkers, as we are in the place, in the right place here to speak about it, and also at the Fordham Public Orthodoxy Forum, which are so Volos and Fordham in New York are for me two important fora that have put into question this importance of tradition, while not denying actually the importance of tradition for the Orthodox Church, but they argue for that a pristine understanding of it commands a critical examination of its solids that would consider and incorporate productions of the human spirit and reason over the last centuries, like findings from humanities, psychiatry, and sociology. This would be more authentic because it would be in line with the liquid characteristics of tradition, its plasticity and adaptability to context, which make it a dynamic living reality. Paradoxically, even the scholars who advocate this kind of, overcoming the fathers justify the need for orthodoxy to distance itself from the solid aspect of tradition as a means to reinforce tradition. And this shows that even the most daring proposals of innovation are presented under this veil of tradition. So it is finally it is something positive for tradition in order to contest tradition and to contextualize tradition and to have a critical assessment of tradition is beneficial to tradition, pointing to the fact that tradition remains a highly normative authority in the Orthodox system of the gift. I argue that at the root of the tension between the classical Orthodox understanding of tradition and modernity, one can read different ways of relating to time. In Orthodoxy, the past appears unchangeable because it is set by the reception of a divine gift, which is believed to be perfect and whole. However, it is not the past per se that seems to be at stake, because in the past things would have been allegedly better, but rather the divine gift that was granted at some point in the past. In other words, the divine gift is located in history, but its content is believed to be ahistorical and timeless, while its inculturation in traditions can be context dependent. Whatever attempts to change, amend, or rework the initial gift out of contingent human considerations are regarded as a denial of the perfection of the initial divine gift, which is equal with the denial of orthodoxy itself. It is thus not the past in and of itself that is cherished and absolutized, but the vertical gift, which happens to be historically situated in various periods of the past. The timeless vertical gift is supposed to inspire and command all stages of human existence at all stages of history. It is the faithful perpetuation of the gift that is aimed at, and not continuity with an idealized past. However, as tradition with a capital T and traditions are so closely intertwined and easily confused with one another, the Church and whole Orthodox societies have often institutionalized this entanglement, carried it into practice, and coded it in ecclesiastic and social life. Back to the perception of time in Orthodoxy, the future is experienced rather as an amorphous mass of potentialities to which Orthodoxy prefers eternity. The present thus is meaningful only in close relationship with the past and in the prospect of the eternal future. Ivana Noble argues that Orthodox theology views tradition, with a capital T, as coming not from the past, but from the eschatological future, which further strengthens tradition's unchangeability. In early modernity, time was understood as progress from a particular state towards a fixed utopian state in the future. The emphasis being on the future, the past appeared as malleable and reinterpretable in light of the utopian horizon. The present acquired enhanced meaning to the extent it contributed to the achievement of the forthcoming utopian prospect. So this perception of time changed in late modernity when the conception of time liquefied and instantaneity of fulfillment enabled by technological and digital progress led to the loss of value and meaning of time, which became an accumulation of moments without dimension. The speed of change being increasingly higher, the idea of past is situated already very close to the present, which implies that the more distant the past, the more irrelevant it is for the present. This understanding of the modern way of relating to time is part of the conditions of belief. This is Charles Taylor's concept, in which contemporary Orthodox believers and churches in the West live out their religious identity and attempt to perpetuate their tradition. The difference in the relation to time, temporality, and history is an important key element we need to consider when analyzing the relationship Orthodoxy has with traditions and tradition. To conclude, the two examples of challenges Orthodoxy faces in contemporary times in the context of migration and settlement into new territories cannot be explained properly if we do not take into account Orthodox self-representations and self-definitions as a particular system of the gift. The specificity of gift-based religions and societies consists in the fact that the gift needs to be perpetuated, to perpetuate itself in time by selectively taking in elements that emanate from outside the gift system. The process of innovation necessitates the recoding of novelty in a way that does not alter the gift system significantly and does not change its constitutive specificity. In the case of Orthodoxy, that is the centrality of the vertical gift and the interrelatedness and embeddedness of the three axes. So I think that, so I'm trying to develop this gift approach, gift paradigm, and I have the, I hope that it's a framework of interpretation that allows to address modern and postmodern challenges in Orthodoxy from a perspective that moves beyond this ideological divide of conservatism versus progressivism or Orthodoxy versus modernity and postmodernity. So.
Thank you, Dr. Maria Hämmerli, for your interesting presentation on this gift perception. So the floor is yours now for questions for around 20 minutes. First question by Professor Tsalabouni.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank both of you for the... Ναι, αλλά μάλλον δεν ακούγεται. Ναι. It's open, yes, thank you. I would like to thank both the presenters, and I had two questions to you, Dr. Kessareas. I found it very interesting what you presented regarding the Greek reality. And I find very interesting what you said about apocalypticism. As a biblical scholar, I find it very interesting because it's a typical, let's say, feature in many texts of the Bible, especially early Christian texts in the New Testament. And I have two questions. The first one is whether there is a kind of interconnection of this apocalyptic worldview and attitude and discourse in the Greek Orthodox or generally Orthodox, let's say, world with the evangelical apocalypticism, which now is a big thing in the States, for example, and elsewhere. I think it's coming in Europe. That's the one thing, whether you can find some common ground, common ideas, or whether there's a kind of interconnection, because sometimes I have the feeling that there's a kind of under the table dialogue between them, but I would like to hear your opinion. The second one, listening to you regarding the crisis, the economic crisis, and all this narrative of hate and so on, how does that differ from similar narratives and discourses in the political scene of Greece? And I'm not talking about Golden Dawn. I would call also left. Do you find that there is a kind of the 2015 referendum and so on, where we had all this kind of narrative? Can you see that there's again something like a common ground? Because I'm afraid we're talking about Golden Dawn, but perhaps we should look the other way as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your two interesting questions. Basically, we can summarize these questions into one question, whether there are interconnections. And I think you are right, there are, we can find the connections and similarities. There's a common ground. As regards to the first issue, of course, all these actors, irrespective of their specific religious tradition, they base their beliefs into some common beliefs. As you have said before, the revelation and the common schemata found there regarding the number of the beast and the second coming, etc. Now, the most interesting thing is that how each tradition interprets all these common motives. For instance, the Greek Orthodox use very much the Byzantine, post-Byzantine apocalyptic literature of that time. But of course, as I have said in my presentation, again, they reformulate all these common motives in order to achieve their contemporary aims. So I would say yes, but we should also pay attention to the differences, how each group reuses the common features that of course exist because there's a common tradition, theological tradition. Now, as regards the second, your second remark and question, again, of course, in a condition of crisis like that which happened in Greece during the Greek financial crisis, and when at stake, especially during the referendum, when the participation of the country was in the European Union and the Eurozone was at stake, such attitudes were widespread in both the extremistic fields, right and left. But again, here, not the difficulty, the most interesting thing is that each field tried to reuse this common anti-Western, anti-European motives and integrated them into their own broader ideology, be it right-wing extremism or the classical anti-capitalistic movement and attitude. So I don't know if I have answered your two remarks. Thank you.
Vlad is the second that he has raised his hand.
Thank you, Stathi, for your presentation. My question has to do with the networks of support, and mainly I mean financial support of all these people. One could say they are crazy, they are psychopaths or whatever, but I think that such a kind of approach would be naive. And I can only imagine that there is also a very strong financial dimension. People who finance newspapers, magazines, sometimes whole infrastructures who promote all these narratives. Could you say some things about this issue?
Thank you very much. This is an important point, and I totally agree with you. I didn't mean to present these actors like crazy or lunatics. No, it's not. That was not my intention. Just I tried to present their mode of thinking. But this is a very important aspect. Of course, they are very well organized, and I cannot give you here details about their financial, who supports them and the financial infrastructure that they have. But we are all aware of that they have specific journals, they finance even specific movies in order to promote their beliefs in the public. And they use, of course, in the age of modern technological communication, they use YouTube very much in order to disseminate their ideas. So yes, but I'm sure that I cannot offer you some specific financial data.
Professor Grigore.
Okay, thank you. These were fascinating talks, and I have questions for both of the presenters. Efstathios, short questions. Who is Antichrist in all these discourses? Is an individual, a collective of individuals, or is an order, a transpersonal order? The second for you, Efstathios, you have on the slide with the Orthodox Talibans, so to say, these both categories of sacred and profane. Are they your categories or their? Okay, because this is Eliade's terminology, okay? And plays hesychasm a role in all these fundamentalistic discourses? Okay, thank you. And also small questions for Maria. You said extending jurisdiction follows ethnical logics in the detriment of territorial criteria, but I think extending jurisdiction is territorial extension, gaining territory for your own nation, which combines ethnicity with confession. And the second one, in the dialectics of innovation and overcoming tradition you had, I missed somehow, and I please to say something about that. I missed the speaking of the invention of tradition. So the term hierapaраdosis as a category appears only very late in the I think on the 4th Council of Constantinople in the 10th century. So as a syntagma.
Yeah, it is possible. One more question in order to close the first round. Second round then.
Sorry. Yes, thank you, both of you. These are really important subjects, I think, for us. A small question to Dr. Kessareas. Thank you also for the importance of the presentation. We need it. You showed to us the mechanics of this fundamentalism, and I think it helped us to understand this very well. A question I would have is I think we can imagine, and this has been mentioned also in that moment, there is also there is a collective crisis, let's say, which is the beginning of this process. But there is also a personal crisis, I think, in every case. It should imagine there is a personal crisis. Is this, we noticed it with, I think now in the COVID pandemics, that we have old friends or persons we know who were completely reasonable persons and, I don't know, doctors or whatever, and they suddenly, they changed completely position and had such discourses. So are these personal crises documented? Is this the subject or not? I don't want to speak about, we said maybe people who become crazy. No, this is not something to be, I mean, it's not a psychological problem, but the fact that this is the response to a personal crisis in the life in general.
Documented by whom?
By people who are working on fundamentalism.
Okay.
Or, I mean, there must be testimonies about that, no? Or not? I mean, in the case of converts, I absolutely not want to say that conversion is due to a personal crisis of this kind, but it can also be in some cases. I mean, a person who has this, I mean, problem, something in his life that converts and then finds even more in this conversion in order to answer questions which are not, this person cannot answer in another context, let's say. I absolutely not want to say that conversion is something on only that.
Thank you both for your questions. Now, first questions made by Mihai. Who is the Antichrist? Well, for them is everyone who is against them. That is why I have shown in the slide various enemies who they are considered enemies because they will destroy their authentic, according to them, Orthodox identity. So there are, of course, specific individuals who are considered to be organs of this of the Antichrist, and more broadly, all the zeitgeist, the spirit of modernity that threatens their own mode of existence. That because we have to understand that these people are not crazy. They have a specific mode of existence, specific values, which they appreciate, and they consider these values as holy. All right. For them, these values are holy. For their opponents, these values are values of the devil, and vice versa. That is why I have said before that we have to understand and explain this phenomenon within the internal struggle that takes place in Orthodoxy. Now, about the categories that I have presented, Taliban and etc. These categories are directed against them by their opponents. The pro-liberal opponents, accuse them as fanatics, as Talibans. And these actors respond this way. Yes, we are Talibans. Yes, we are Taliban, but they re-signify the meaning of the term. It's not fanaticism for them, but it's holy zeal to protect the holy things. And this is very important. All right. Concerning their attitude towards Hesychasm, in my research, I have found that these actors are not satisfied with a contemplative perspective. They consider it too soft. They have a fighting spirit. They want to change things dramatically. So they are not satisfied with some contemplative theosis through the traditional means of prayer, or through they are not satisfied either with a philosophical objection to modernism. They are men of the writings of action. Now, if I understand well your own remark, as on a more theoretical level, every collective crisis is based and promotes further personal incidents of crisis. That is why I have talked about the conditions that in such conditions these people search for psychological stability and for meaning, and this is important for them, all right? And these actors appear as those who offer the explanatory framework, but also the solution, even if the solutions are considered by their opponents as simple, simplistic solutions. Now, I cannot remember right now to offer you if there is a specific empirical research on this subject. I have to search it before. Yes. Thank you very much.
So the question regarding territory and ethnicity. So if the mother churches exercise jurisdiction not over people, but also on geographical territories, right? I don't think they really exercise jurisdiction over territory because they really over people, but they exercise soft power in a geographical area, in a given area, but jurisdiction over people, because geographically the geographical areas on which each church creates dioceses is very moving. You know, it just follows the people. You know, and so how each mother church defines its dioceses and calls them in the West is very different. You know, you have the Serbian diocese in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. You have the Romanians who have for Western and Southern Europe, or you know, and even when they grow, then they then this geographical and jurisdictional cutting of geographical, I don't have the word in English, découpage. It changes, you know. So it says just in Italy, or just or Western Europe, or in Western Europe it has like 4 or 5 countries, and so this geographical aspect is very moving, and it follows actually the people. So
you meant only the Western diaspora, not the dioceses. You meant only the Western diaspora, not the dioceses like the metropolis of Bessarabia, which follows territorial and political.
No, I meant just for the West, yes. And then regarding the second question, the invention of tradition. No, I didn't mention it. So you didn't miss it. So you didn't miss it. Well, I think independently of when the term itself appeared and imposed itself in the Orthodox parlance, the content the content is quite the same, in the sense that it includes, it's always spoke about, you know, the scriptures, the ecumenical councils, the fathers, the liturgy, you know. So tradition is.
We heard yesterday that the liturgy is not the liturgy. Okay. It's only a thing to think about, because Anastasius speaks in the 4th century about tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Anastasius speaks in the 4th century about tradition, but he had no ecumenical councils to fill the concept of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
They speak also in the 10th century about holy tradition, and there are the ecumenical councils. So, you know, they constructed.
Well, yes, I mean, the content can be enlarged depending also on theologians. You know, they will include more things in it. Others, they will be more minimalists, what tradition means. But I think in my gift theoretical framework, what is important is that it is believed to be divinely revealed and untouchable. Whatever you put inside, you know, and then you have maximalists and minimalists. So.
I have also another question. Background, yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentations, very interesting presentations. I have a question for Professor Kessareas. It was very interesting, but if you could elaborate more on the place of nationalism in the discourse of these fundamentalist movements, whether there are divisions within this movement, between, for instance, old calendarists and followers of the official Church of Greece, and a comment about the Golden Dawn. We know that there is an ideological affinity between the Golden Dawn and these circles, and not only these circles, but the church at large, I would say, especially this school of thought of former Archbishop Christodoulos. But there is no voting relation. So the religious electorate does not vote for the radical right, so but votes for the conservative right, as it is a broad phenomenon in Europe. Thank you.
Let's take one more question by Kostis.
No, it's rather a just observation that it's not only for this panel, but it's also for Professor Moskos and Professor Grigore also, that I think that all this discussion shows that we have a kind of gap in Orthodoxy between what we actually did, what we actually do. I mean, for example, people are use contemporary media like YouTube, what Efstathios said, and so on, and what we consider, what we confess that we actually do. We use the contemporary media, but we insist that we have a very old tradition which is unchangeable. In fact, if you dig the tradition, it's not unchangeable. There are changes, there are historical changes. That's exactly the historic dimension of Orthodoxy, which we tend to neglect. And so we must think about this kind of gap. And maybe public Orthodoxy, as you said it, and Volos Academy dig somehow this concept. We should do it a little more, maybe. Thanks.
But if I may, taking the advantage of moderator in this session, I would like to pose a question to you. I'm sure that you are aware of the Appleby-Martin typology of fundamentalism in the Fundamentalist project, where they distinguish between an Abrahamic religious type and another ethno-religious type. So your perception of fundamentalism, where actually does it stand?
Thank you all for your comments and questions. Now, the issue of nationalism, of course, it's a big issue within Orthodox Christianity and does not only concern the so-called rigorist and fundamentalist. We can find the same, we can find other even hierarchs, even official clergy who promote such kind of nationalistic ideas. And this, of course, can be explained, this phenomenon can be explained historically due to the nationalization of the churches. How they have been created after in the modern era, after the Ottoman occupation and the creation of the new nation states. So nationalism does not exist only in the field of rigorism. We can find it also within the official church, promoted by specific clergymen, but that does not make these official clerics as fundamentalists. We have to distinguish between official church and between these groups. We have to take into consideration their exact objective position within the religious field, because all these fundamentalist rigorists have a counter position, have an attitude of opposition against the official church. They consider the nationalism of the official church too soft. They accuse the official church, even when it expresses nationalism, as an institution that in the end promotes compromises and works with the established political system. Yes, I'm fully aware of this distinction for the Fundamentalist project and the Appleby categorization. And I have also read your interesting and influential article on this subject. And I think, as I have presented in my in the presentation, that this, especially in Orthodox majority countries, we can find these actors belonging more to this ethno-religious part of fundamentalism, and this is something as kind of a modern transformation, right? Of kind of modern transformation, that this is a combination of faith and a nation. They consider them both to be an organic unity, and I will draw from another term from the bibliography. This is characterized in sociological terms as ethnodoxy, this strong combination between these two terms.
Well, I just wanted to continue on your remark previously, Mr. Kyrianakis, that there is a gap between what the Orthodox do and what they say. And that actually the Orthodox do espouse modernity, but I think mostly in its material forms, you know, like, okay, yes, they will be on YouTube, they will post, you know, they will use, they will use everything that, all the tools, material tools of modernity. But so in this sense, the church and the people and the clergy, they all do all sorts of adaptations and they innovate, yes. So there is change, but I think that it is so this is the liquid part of tradition, let's say, so traditions with small t, but the tradition with a capital T, it remains, and I see for academic theologians, it is like a straitjacket because it is so untouchable that it becomes a straitjacket, and they need to also be able to open that, you know, and discuss, you know. So, and I think this is where Volos Academy and Public Orthodoxy.
In fact, I think that exactly this distinction between what is the tradition with capital T and what is the traditions is a matter of discourse. Because, for example, you spoke about public orthodoxy. There was about the pandemic also. There was a very interesting discussion when it became obligatory to have the chalice and not to have the communion through a common glass or through a disc or something like that. So we saw it in Greece that the way that the communion was transmitted, it became a kind of dogma. And it triggered a lot of debate that we cannot change. We cannot use one, what's the correct, spoon for one time and so on. So the distinction between what is the real, the hard tradition and what is the traditions in plural is always liquid, I think. And
yes, I think there is often conflation, you know, between the two, and when the same sacred role is attributed to traditions and to the small t, then we have also fundamentalist movements, you know, because and that is, for instance, in my framework of interpretation, that is a mistake in the gift, because it's only the tradition with the capital T that is supposed to be of divine inspiration and of divinely revealed, not the small things that we are doing everyday life. This is contextualized, and if you move that, if you attribute this sacred meaning to everyday small things, then you end up in nonsense.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah.
And for me, at least from my own perspective, the most important thing is that all these different actors invoke the same sacred tradition with capital T in order to legitimize their different perspectives. So yes, for them, they have a sacred tradition, but they interpret it differently in order to promote their own understanding of this tradition. Right. Thank you.
May I give the microphone to Professor Moskos for a very brief comment? Yeah.
We've now, thank you. We've now have in that discussion recently the idea that everything that is changed is actually, regardless whether there is theologically or liturgically justified, alone, the fact alone that we change something is already raised the suspicion that this is, you know, the open door, the back door for ruining everything. We have the board of the academy, the Metropolitan of Peristerion, and try to make a minor change in the architecture of the altar, to remove the cross with the crucifix, which is actually the center. Although he managed to prove that this is actually a very recent change, we have this thing there, and there's a huge criticism that, regardless whether this is right or wrong, alone the fact that the Metropolitan tries to change something in the liturgy or in the sanctuary and so on, it's a treason. So, I mean, it's not what is the question, what is changed, but the fact alone that something is changed is already.
You know, yeah. This reminds me of a joke. You know, how many Orthodox does it take to change a bulb? Oh. Change.
So thank you both of you for your presentation. Before closing the session, I would like to say two things. The first one is that our bookstore is still open until the afternoon break, coffee break. So for those that you have not yet bought any book, there is still a chance. The second not actually announcement, is that in your folder you will find these two cards related to two of our projects. Take a few minutes, scan the QR code, and navigate through the content of these websites. You will find very interesting material and information. So